I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School talking about the presidential nomination. So, when thinking about the nomination for president, let's think about the typical candidate. And typical is probably the wrong word. When I say typical here, I mean historically, what are the general rules for presidential hopefuls? So I'm going to go through some of the common rules, and maybe those rules are changing. So it's been a common rule that governors are selected by the national conventions. Governors have had experience in the position. They've been chief executive of their state, so they might be better prepared to be chief executive of the federal government. Additionally, governors don't really have to take vote-losing stands, meaning that they sort of approve a bill or they veto a bill, whereas someone in a state legislature or in Congress takes numerous votes, and that sort of position taking can be, politically challenging to explain all along the way in your career. So governors historically have been a good pool of candidates. Generals, so even if you don't have the political background, you will be, as president, commander-in-chief of the largest military in the world, so having experience in the military is very logical, and that can also give you prominence and a lot of support from Americans. The trend now is moving towards senators. Senator Obama was a first-term senator who won the nomination and then went on to win the presidency. And as we look at the array of candidates in the 2016 primaries on the Republican side, a whole lot of senators like Cruz and Rubio, and on the Democratic side, both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are senators. So that's kind of a newer trend taking away. Another rule, Anglo, but that one might be diminishing. Barack Obama's presidency definitely demonstrates that it's not an absolute rule, but we'll see in the long term if that rule has really faded. Being Protestants, all but one president has been Protestant, so everyone but Kennedy. So sort of that Anglo stock, English stock, and being Protestant are typical of the candidates, and that reflects that still a majority of Americans are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Being from a large swing state is also a good rule of thumb, because if you win the nomination for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, it is assumed you can win your state. So if your state is a big state that has a lot of electoral votes, that's good. And if it's a swing state, then it's really good because it ensures that you win it and not the other party. Of course, the rule of political talent, that a candidate should have had some successful experience in government. So this year in 2016, that's sort of being defied on the Republican ticket so far in the Republican primary. We've seen Carly Fiorina, Donald Trump, and Ben Carson, none of whom have any elected experience, but maybe they have some other talent that lends itself to politics, but none of them have elected experience. The image of a happy family life is probably still very important, even as the typical American family might not be so typical, and how that is becoming more modern. The image of a happy family, a photogenic family, happy wife, happy children, is important in politics. It's an image that probably plays upon all of our sort of subconscious expectations of what we want in a president. Being from a small town used to be, something that would be very typical of a candidate, sort of that small town American candidate. That, I think, kind of like the governors moving, the governorship not being a certain way to the presidency, but rather than it now being senator. I would say being from a big city is no longer seen as a negative in the way that it was in the past. So sort of that small town candidate, I would say that is fading. So both parties, they're going to put forth candidates generally that that fall into this. And then both parties also have to think about how their candidate can appeal to more voters. So pick the candidate that's going to appeal to maybe a block of voters that you're having trouble getting, or think of a candidate that's going to make sure you keep a block of voters. So right now, the Republican Party has been concerned with garnering more women voters. That's the gender gap that leans women a little bit Democrat over Republican. Also very focused on getting the Hispanic vote. So they might want to nominate candidates that can appeal to those blocks of voters, because we're noticing when it comes to elections over time are just becoming so individualized. You know, it's not so much about the party anymore, it's about the individual, and if he or she is electable and appealing to voters. So here's what makes the primary process essentially super complicated, is that states are run by, elections are run by the states. So that means that we have, 50 states plus our territories and the District of Columbia that get to set the rules for elections. And then within each state, you have the two major parties. Now, parties also are not mentioned in the Constitution. So they are groups that can organize to nominate a candidate. So when we think about the general election, when I teach that, that's going to be a lot more straightforward than teaching the primaries, because the primaries are a matter of how the party wants to pick its nominee in every state according to state law. So it's all very complicated and really local. And I have links for you, and I'll show you on the website right now where those links are. So here is today's stuff. And this is the guide to the Republican nomination by state from Time Magazine. And this is the guide to the Democratic nomination. So let's look at the Democratic one, because that one is not more simple, but what I have here, this link is, this document's a little more simple. This is from realclearpolitics.com, and what it shows you in a second is by state how many delegates each state has. And then you have to remember, in the Democratic Party, the superdelegates are incredibly powerful. So this is end of February of 2016. And you can see all the states in the order in which their primaries occur. Here's Super Tuesday, a lot of states participating in March, in the Tuesday, March 1st election. And so there are a total of 4,763 delegates needed to win. And 2,382 needed to win. And you can see here Clinton really does have the superdelegates on her side. You can pause this and look at this, or go to my website, click the link, and play around with it. The other one I want you to look at, and you probably should pause it and read it in more time, in your own time, is this one from Time Magazine that goes through the 2016 Republican primary. And this one's a bit more complicated, partly because of the sheer number of candidates. The superdelegates for the Republican Party aren't quite as super. A lot of them are more bound. And this document here from Time Magazine goes through the calendar, and additionally, besides showing you the number of delegates, it's going to show you how each state allots its delegates, because some states do proportional, meaning depending on the percent you win in the state, that's the percent of delegates you get to send to the National Convention. And then other ones do winner take all, where if you win the most votes in the state in the primary, then you get all of the state's electoral votes. I'm having trouble scrolling down right here, so you'd have to click on this link on your own. Oh, well, maybe it'll let me do it now. Okay, no, you'll have to click it on your own, but we read it together in class. Okay, so primaries. We also looked at a political cartoon. Okay, I'll have the political cartoon scanned in so you can pause this, look at the political cartoon, look at the questions below, and think on your own. But what I want to talk about are criticisms of the way we do our primaries and caucuses. Well, now that you've seen how the states do them and how long the calendar is, that's kind of the main criticism is that we stretch it out. And the way we stretch it out makes the campaigning season for a politician so long, and it makes it so long for the voter. Because people started talking about the 2016 presidential election way back in 2014, speculation. Then by 2015, anyone who wants to be a serious candidate needs to already be planning their campaign and getting their name out there and sort of laying the groundwork. And that long campaigning keeps candidates from actually doing their jobs. It keeps senators from the U.S. Senate voting, but rather they're visiting Iowa and New Hampshire and not focusing on their jobs in which they've been elected at this point to fulfill. So with this very long campaign, there's also a lot of money that is needed to run a campaign. Most candidates, they end up dropping out of the race because they run out of money. Now, part of the reason they run out of money is because of the front loading that's done. So states have a disproportionate amount of influence depending on where in the calendar their primary falls. Iowa and New Hampshire are early, the earliest caucus and the earliest primary. If you do well in those states, then potential donors are more likely to continue donating to your campaign because you are already ahead of the game. If you do poorly in those states, that signals that your campaign is not doing well, and donors are less likely to contribute. So it's a snowball effect there of candidates getting money if they're likely to win, and then they're more likely to win if they continue getting money. So candidates tend to run out of money. And then, when you have states like Iowa and New Hampshire, which don't actually represent a very large part of the overall electorate and the overall, power in the Electoral College, they have so much power in weeding out candidates. Getting first, second, or third is what you need to stay in the process, to stay in the campaign. But if you do poorly, even if you would have done well in so many other states, if you do poorly there, it's very hard to continue on to the states you were going to potentially do quite well in. So these are the main criticisms, but it is going to be tricky if you're thinking, why don't we just move to one day across the country? I want to remind you, elections are state-run, and parties are not at all mentioned in the Constitution. So this would require a strong party, a strong national party that could mandate for all the states, all the state parties, cohesion in that process. And there is really no, the National Committee is not strong enough to really do that. Okay, so those are presidential primaries, not to be confused with how we do the regular direct primary for our local and congressional elected officials.